here and things are moving, we can sit on something and move, and it's actually healthy. We sit static and don't move; it's destructive. The researcher, the medical doctor from the Mayo Clinic in Phoenix, Arizona, he came up with every hour we don't move, we lose 21.8 minutes of life. You imagine if there was an elixir where you took it and you said, yeah, I average a human being 8 to 12 hours a day, and we lose 21.8 minutes of life every time we sit. So if I could get back 6 or 7 or 8 hours a day the rest of my life, what would we do? Sitting on a gym ball, it's having a mini tramp. It's doing little things as far as it goes. So how I think, how I move, how I eat. I think also just starting slow, starting within your skill sets. Almost everybody starts outside their skill set. And so if you tell somebody from the US you need to meditate, they're like, oh, meditate. I mean, I can't last 5 seconds. That's okay. You can start out with just one deep breath, and all you do is take 5 seconds. You pay attention to your breath. Most of us can pay attention for 5 seconds. Some of us maybe not much more than that, but you just take a deep breath through your nose. You take it in. You count 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. Let it out. 1, 2, 3, 4. You breathe through your nose, and it's just an easy. And if you do that every 15 minutes, and you take 5 seconds, and you do that, it will change the physiology of your body. You know, when Dr. Aaron talked about epigenetics is I have a genetic code, and in that code, think about it as piano keys. And whatever piano keys I play the most is what expresses itself. Some of us can't have that piano key played very much, and if we're an American Indian and we ate too much sugar, excuse me, our chance of diabetes goes way up because we play that code too much. If we're from other parts of the country, the sad thing is, and again, when I hear a commercial that talks about genetics, if we bring people in this country, within 2 years, they have the same health issues we have. Totally different somewhere else, totally like us. And it's not just our eating, it's our moving, it's our stress, it's what we do, it's all of it. I think the other thing, and there was a recent study out there, and I worry with the pandemic, and I worry what we've done is, so depending on where we think, we always want to jump on things. So the Blue Zone wrote a book earlier, and it looked like if you're willing to be poor and you're willing to not collect very much and you're willing not to, that you could be healthier as far as it goes. So then he looked at said, okay, in Costa Rica, they live with almost nothing and they have nothing, but they spend 6 hours with human interaction a day, families and that. Well, then he went to Scandinavia and said, man, we got way healthy people there, and they're willing to have really high taxes. Not a lot of them, you can't buy a home in that, but they're really healthy too. But 6 hours of common time. Then we went to Singapore, and Singapore has some of the highest income levels and some of the healthiest people, but they did not sacrifice time. They still have 6 hours. So the common link is 6 hours of common time. Almost all of them are studies that talk about health or happiness. They've not put the non-monetary societies in there. And when you put the non-monetary societies in there, it's time with people. It's not collecting things. And when we collect things at the expense of human relationship, we're massively in trouble. When we talk, our next talk, what we're going to talk about kids, we're going to really talk about the reward system. We talk with kids. We talk about what we do, the decision-making process, how we inclusion, what we do. But if we are not giving kids skill sets of resiliency, it doesn't matter. The world is hard. The remembering stuff, what we have our kids remember. There's a great study they did where, everything in science often has four charts. So if I had a square up here and I drew 4, then you ask people over 70, how was your life? The group that said best life ever, number 1, worst life ever, number 4. Then they took them and they surveyed them, a really complex survey, and they had another group follow them out. There was no difference between the group that said I had a horrible life and I had a good life. The remembering self, what was so different. And when our kids come home and they're little girls and they're struggling in school, and we sit down and said, Julie, how did it go today? How did the other girls treat you today? Was it okay? Did you have fun? And we over and over and ask them about what we didn't like. Man, I can't tell you how many times in the last 20 years I've told moms to stop asking their kids what went wrong and start asking them what went right, and their stomach issues go away. And they've spent thousands of dollars on studies on stomach, or studies in medical doctors on stomach issues. You cannot be under stress and have a normal functioning nervous system. When Dr. Aaron talks about 80% of your immune system goes to your digestive tract, 80% of your blood cell guys goes to your digestive tract. Dr. Aaron, he loves Star Wars, but he thinks Star Trek is just absolutely phony. I kind of like Star Trek and that, but in Star Trek, if you think about your immune system, Our body puts resources around need to survive. And so when we heard Kirk yell at Scotty, I shut off life support. We need the lasers because if they blow up the ship, it didn't matter. I mean, nothing mattered. And our body stops our digestive system almost the minute we feel stress. It shuts everything down. The little cells that produce acid in the stomach, the globular cells, our body says no. And there's studies out there saying Crohn's disease is just chronic stress that shunts the blood away from intestines so aggressively that it kills cells in the intestines and that. We cannot be healthy if we're not moving, if we're not taking pressure on eating, and if we're not thinking well. We cannot, because our digestive tract takes the beating. And when we look at, we cannot spend ourselves out of healthcare. You know, when we look at other countries like Greece that has healthcare that we pay for, can you imagine? We do not collect enough taxes to pay for healthcare. There's not enough money out there for sick people, and we aren't healthier because we have sick people in that. We ourselves have to decide that. So, so if you want to watch some of our previous talks, we have a YouTube page. You just go to Bouch Chiropractic. We have at least 25 talks. Some are 5 minutes. Some are about little things you can do. We have a lot of talks about making your living room a movement room, not a sitting room. You think at one time people sat in living rooms because we were so physically tired. We're not anymore. And then what did we add to a living room? We added a TV. So we don't move and we don't talk. What a horrible thing. If we were going to write, and when we talk about 6 hours of, like when I say that humans should spend 6 hours talking to each other, most people say, oh my gosh, that's unbelievable. How many hours does the average person spend on when watching TV? 6 hours. If we turn that 6 hours into people time, everything would change. The average child spends 8 to 10 hours on some kind of electronic device. Can you imagine what that's doing to the brain? Can you imagine what's happening to kids when they do that? And when I talk to parents, I say, you know, lots of things I think you shouldn't ask your kids, but they cannot regulate their time on a computer. You need to regulate that. And what do they say? When I take the computer away, or it's iPhone or whatever they take away my 9-year-old, they'll scream and yell and go on the floor and they won't eat. I mean, it is so addicting that they become way, way charged on it as far as it goes. And then the last thing on mental health, which we're going to talk a lot, we have to get our kids to understand that we want to have the brain hit with serotonin as much as possible, the frontal cortex. If we're not hitting serotonin, there's a part of the brain that deregulates the brain into crisis. And you cannot talk somebody out of crisis if there's not enough serotonin. The other thing is oxytocin. It's the love hormone. It's the cuddle hormone. And when you take a baby, you touch it and you kiss it, it fires up oxytocin all over the brain. I really am fearful that 9 months of grandmas not kissing babies is going to have a devastating effect on babies' brains. I just think it's going to be something that is going to be so unbelievable that we don't go with it. And if we do not have oxytocin and dopamine, I mean oxytocin and serotonin, if we don't have those two things, we default to dopamine. And dopamine is the addictor. And when we have dopamine and cortisol, we will never get rid of pornography if we can't understand dopamine in brains. We will never get rid of sex trades with children if we don't have dopamine under control. Because if there wasn't a market for it, it would happen. And again, when we punish somebody and tell them, it's really what is happening in it. When we talk about fireproofing a marriage, if we have serotonin and oxytocin, it fireproofs a marriage. If we don't, we look for dopamine, and that's the addictor. We spend money on gambling, we spend money on things we'd never spend on. When we're unhappy, we buy something, and we're the most consumer-driven society in the world because we're unhappy. You buy something, you get a dopamine rush, you go down, you feel horrible, so you buy something, you get a dopamine rush, you go down. In a civilized society, how could money be the number one reason for divorce? I mean, how could it possibly be? But if we don't address dopamine, we're in trouble. And so when we raise our kids, we have to have a serotonin oxytocin plan. If we don't, we will have kids that are going to struggle more than ever. And that from 8 to 18, the second leading cause of non-traumatic death is suicide. Like, whoa, like when are we going to do it? I had a little 8-year-old a year ago that tried to commit suicide, and they went to an institute over in Green Bay, and the institute was filled with 8-year-olds that tried to commit suicide. Can you imagine? I mean, like, what are we doing? And when are we going to get serious about what we're doing? Because how bad does it have to get before we make a difference as far as it goes? Again, so I can't trust enough. Tell your friends, tell everybody, post it everywhere. The Talkman Kids is going to be absolutely, I mean, it's going to rock. It's going to be so absolutely unbelievable. And if we do not have more talks about raising kids, we're gonna just, and I'm gonna get the phone calls I get where somebody is sleeping next to their 14-year-old because they're cutting and bulimic, and we're seeing that more and more. And I can't imagine the devastation of that. I can't imagine young people, or when we think we can talk a girl into eating, when their brain looks at it, and think about our brain as envelopes. And whatever envelope you in, you can't think different. You can't tell somebody, look at yourself. Can't you see how horrible you look? Like, can't you see? Like, that works. When you're in that envelope, you're in that envelope. It doesn't matter. You have to move somebody to a different envelope. And what is that movement of envelopes? Serotonin and oxytocin. That moves envelopes. And when cortisol goes through the brain, it's like a rhino going through the brain. When serotonin and oxytocin, it's like a mouse. And we have to have lots of mice running through the brain with oxytocin and serotonin to make up for a rhino. And you know, when I do a talk around the country, one thing I used to do, and I'm real hesitant about, I tell people, I say, close your eyes, and when you're 6-year-old, remember when somebody was their worst, when you need to be their best. When you're 12-year-olds, when somebody was the worst, when you need to be their best, and people break down and start crying. We cannot afford right now, more than ever, that if people need us to be our best more than they ever have, and if we're not taking care of us the best we've ever taken care of ourselves, because when that person and that little hand and that little reaches up and they need us to be the best we possibly can be, and we're not, man, we are in trouble. We are way in trouble. There's not enough human interaction for our kids right now. It better be really good. I'm just going to end. You as parents, put your cell phones away. One of the saddest things I saw, the last talk I did in Orlando before everything shut down, the pool was unbelievable. It was filled with sand. It was the coolest thing in the world. And a little kid runs up to his dad, and he's about 4 years old, and he says, Dad, please watch me. And he runs to the water, and before he gets there, his dad's on the cell phone again. 6 times he ran up. All he wanted to do was show his dad that he put his head in the water. And his dad couldn't stay off his goddamn cell phone long enough to say, yes, I see you and appreciate you. And when that serotonin doesn't hit the brain, and that cortisol or oxytocin doesn't hit the brain, then that kid is driven by dopamine, and you wonder why they're an alcoholic at 10 and they're an alcoholic at 12 and they're hooked to pornography. And we know why it happens, and we have to get better. And put your cell phones away. Just absolutely look at kids. Do not take the opportunity to miss one moment to have serotonin and oxytocin for children. Because again, if they don't commit suicide because they're lonely, they commit suicide because they're not paid attention to, and they become lonely. Because people aren't lonely by themselves, they're lonely because they are by themselves because nobody pays attention. And the biggest thing that's caused that is cell phones. We need to get rid of them. Absolutely. No cell phone times. The healthiest families right now are checking the cell phone at the door. We need to be good about that. We just have to. So again, we're going to give a rock and talk on kids. Absolutely tell the world about it. We hope we do it. This talk, Dr. Aaron did such an amazing job. Forward it on your Facebook pages. The last one we did, we had well over 1,500 people see. I hope we can do 2,000 or 3,000, and when we do the kids talk, I'd love to get 10,000, because again, we have to do something. So other than that, thank you so much, and we'll see you in a month.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.